Thank you to the conference organizers for the invitation and for putting this all together. It's been a great conference so far with wonderful talks, and it's an honor to be here talking about pre-registration. You go back here, sorry. There we go. Great. In the opening session on Sunday, we heard about bridges and the problem with our current peer review bridge. And my goal in this talk is to talk about why pre-registration is one important fix for that bridge, okay? Particularly, although not exclusively, but particularly within the social, biological, and medical sciences broadly defined. Okay? As most people probably know, pre-registration at its core just means specifying in advance what you intend to do in the research process. But there are different kinds of pre-registration, and the bridge that you build can look a little different depending on which one you're talking about. Okay? As well, some of those bridges solve some problems and don't solve other problems. Okay? And what I want to suggest is that a particular kind of pre-registration called peer review pre-registration or registered reports is a really good design for fixing a lot of the important problems that we've seen emerge in the last few decades. So I'll start with a quick overview of pre-registration and registered reports, and then spend the bulk of the time talking about why this solution works, as is the theme of the session, and also some common misunderstandings of pre-registration. So oftentimes, these are important because a lot of times people are reluctant to pre-register, but that reluctance is based on something that is actually a misunderstanding, and a lot of the data that we have from our journal so far suggests that these are in fact misunderstandings and are not real concerns. Okay. Throughout the talk, I'll also focus on what we've learned in implementing this process at our journal, as mentioned, Comprehensive Results in Social Psychology, which has been around since 2015 and publishes research on any topic in social psychology very broadly defined. Okay? And before I get too far into it, I want to remember to note that Kai Jonas is the co-founding editor of the journal, and in fact, the journal was Kai's vision, and he did all of the really difficult work to get the journal running, up and running in the beginning. Okay. So CRSP is a peer review pre-registration journal. Okay? We publish what is called registered reports. That is different than pre-registration alone. Okay? In standard pre-registration models, okay, the research process looks like the following. You have some idea for a study or for doing some kind of research or some sort of analysis. Okay? You formulate what you're going to do, and then you formally pre-register that plan. Okay? That formal plan can vary in terms of how detailed it is, in terms of the depth, in terms of the scope. There's no real one set way of pre-registering, but at some level, you're specifying what you're going to be doing ahead of time. You put that pre-registration out there, let's say on the Open Science Framework or something like that. Okay? Once you've done that, you then do the standard research and publication process. You do your study, you collect the data, you analyze your data, whatever it is that you're going to do, you write up your manuscript, okay, you submit that manuscript to a journal, to any journal, let's say Psychological Science, okay, that manuscript goes out for peer review, and then there's some editorial decision that's made along the way, okay. In this sense, standard pre-registration is just like the regular research and publication process, but you happen to say what you are going to do up front. Okay? And importantly, in the standard pre-registration format, there's no check at all that you actually followed the original pre-registered protocol that you had set forth. And that's why, for example, we heard yesterday that in psychological science, 27 out of 27 papers that had pre-registration badges had deviated from the pre-registration. Okay? There's no one making a check on that necessarily that you've done what you actually said you were going to do. Okay, so the pre-registration is kind of just hanging out there in the whole process, but not fundamentally altering the research and the publication process. The format for registered reports is different. Okay, it is a fundamentally different model in the registered reports format. Okay, for registered reports format, you have some research idea. What you're then going to do is write up the manuscript, okay? So you will write up a full manuscript that will look exactly like your final manuscript, except instead of everything being in the past tense, everything's in the future tense. Okay? These are the number of subjects that we're going to collect. These are the analyses that we're going to do. But the manuscript that you produce will look exactly like a finished product. It has an introduction, the method, the proposed methods, the proposed analyses, a discussion, references. All of it looks the same, but it's all about what you're going to do in advance. That then gets submitted, for example, to CRSP, and the manuscript proposal goes out for peer review. Okay? Of course, then there's some revise and resubmit. There's back and forth with the author. Sometimes you get rejected. Okay? It's not like everything that gets submitted as a registered report actually gets accepted, but there's going to be some back and forth, typically in the revise and resubmit stages. And if everything goes well, at some point then the paper is given an in-principle acceptance. Okay, so this entire process is what we call the stage 1 process, and at the end of the stage 1 process you get an IPA. An IPA is a contract that says if you do what you said you were going to do in the proposal, your paper will be published regardless of what the results show. Okay, regardless of what the data end up showing, your paper is going to be published provided you stick to the proposal that was peer-reviewed. At that point, then, that serves as your pre-registration. Okay? So the final document that you have there is the formal pre-registered document. Then you go through and we enter stage 2, where you conduct a study, you do whatever analysis you said you were going to do. You revise the manuscript, again, by moving everything in the future tense to the past tense and inserting all of the data and the numbers that you want to be there. That then gets submitted as your stage 2 manuscript, and the associate editor, then the handling editor, is going to make a decision about that. Now, this is a simplified version of it. There are some difficulties. What happens if the person does deviate from the proposed? If they said they were going to collect 300 students and they got 299, what does the editor do with that? So there are some difficulties that we have to deal with along the way. But by and large, at the stage 2 resubmission, those papers usually do not go out for review again to the reviewers. They could, but typically things are straightforward enough that the handling editor makes a decision and the paper goes ahead and gets published. Okay, so that's the nature of the registered reports, and at the end I'm happy to take questions about specifics in that whole process. Okay, what does the process of registered reports accomplish? Okay, what are the strengths? What kind of solution does it offer to the problems of research integrity? Okay, like all pre-registration, okay, there are some bad driver problems, to use that phrase, that registered reports deal with. Okay, so both the standard pre-registration model and the registered reports model can deal with things like researcher degrees of freedom. Okay, trying a bunch of analyses and only reporting the one that gives you the results that you want, and so on. We know all about these sorts of things. Both of those models of pre-registration can deal with that. Okay. Hypothesizing after the results are known, or what's called harking. Okay, you have to say what you thought was going to happen ahead of time in the pre-registration model, so it helps stops researchers from interpreting noise as signal by just revising their theory in order to accommodate for the data, whatever data they might have found. Okay, and also things like hiding measures, hiding manipulations, not reporting, suppressing unpleasant analyses that you may have done, all of those sorts of things. Both the standard pre-registration model and the registered report model can take care of those. Okay? They're all solutions for some of the crumbling of the peer review bridge that we see. Okay? At the same time, however, there are some really important strengths that registered reports and registered reports alone can provide for both the researcher and the whole research and publication process, all right, that standard pre-registration on its own cannot solve, and certainly not pre-registering at all can't solve this either. Okay. And I'm going to talk about 4 major benefits of the registered report format, and along the way, as I said, I'll talk about some of the misunderstandings of the format as well. Okay. The first is that registered reports, and only registered reports, can help with the problem of publication bias. Okay, so some of the cracks in the bridge that we see is the crack to only publish statistically significant results. This is really well known. We've known this in psychology since at least the late 50s, okay, that papers have a bias against being published unless they've, quote, found something, and by found something we mean finding a statistically significant result in some way. Okay. Standard pre-registration can't solve this problem, but registered reports can, because the decision to publish is made prior to any results being known. Okay. The decision to publish is made as it should be in science, based on the quality of the research idea, the methodology, and the analysis, the proposed analyses for answering that question. Okay? Second, and related to publication bias, but actually discussed much less frequently than publication bias, peer publication bias, is the suppression of controversial results or results that go against peer reviewers' preferences. Okay, so one of the problems with the peer review process and with editorial decisions is that editors and reviewers can prevent research from getting published if they don't like the findings, for instance, if they go against their own political or ideological preferences. Okay, that's scientific dishonesty, it's a failure of research integrity, and it's unethical behavior on the part of reviewers and journal editors, but it happens all the time, particularly within the social sciences. Okay, and we know how it happens. It happens with things like holding research that we don't like, the findings that we don't like, to a higher standard than the findings that we do like. Applying standards that don't exist to findings that confirm what we want to be true to those that don't confirm that we want to be true. Okay, so there's lots of ways of doing that. Registered report format prevents that from happening by forcing the editorial decision before the editors and the reviewers know what the findings actually are. Okay, this is something that blind results review has been another proposal to deal with this issue. Okay. The third benefit of registered reports, again, that is separate from the standard pre-registration format, is that you get advice on your research early on in the research process before you invest all of the time and money and effort into doing your study. Okay? And so what happens then is that the peer review process in the registered reports model becomes a much more collaborative effort. Okay? It's a collaborative effort between the editor, the researchers, and the reviewers, all of whom have the shared goal of making the research proposal as strong as possible. And that's a great thing, and you can see it actually in the reviews that we get in our articles for CRSP. The registered report format changes the tone and it changes the purpose of the peer review process dramatically. Okay? We do not get reviews at CRSP that are along the lines of, the authors did this study, I'm going to tell you why it's awful, or they have this proposal, I'm going to tell you why it's awful, and I'm going to tell you why they're stupid and I'm smart as the reviewer. Okay? We don't get those. Right? Literally what comes through in the reviews is that the reviewers have the approach of, I want this to have the best chance it possibly can to make the biggest contribution it can, and I'm really excited to be part of this process. Okay? And that's a great thing. How often would we have loved to have gotten some input from senior members of the field, particularly if you're a younger researcher, okay, from a senior member of the field who has the goal of helping your research along to become great. Okay, that's a wonderful thing, and that's part only of the registered reports and not with the standard pre-registration model, and certainly not with the standard publication model. Okay. This is important also because this feedback removes some of the incentives that occur later on for research dishonesty, okay? Because you're getting your corrective information at the early stages that stops you from having to be dishonest or lie about what you've done in your research later on with the goal of getting a publication. Okay. Fourth, and what I think is actually the most important strength of the registered report model, okay, is that what the registered report can do for you as the practicing scientist. Okay? It changes the approach of the scientist, and it changes the incentives for that scientist in a way that can address a lot of the problems that we've seen in the peer review process. Okay? Many of those cracks in the bridge that have been widened over the past few decades, given the incentive structure that we have, actually get transformed into something very positive in the registered report format. Okay? So what do I mean by this? The registered report format rewards the individual scientist for being a good scientist. Okay? And in doing so, it actually returns the joy of doing science back to the actual process of doing science and not just publishing papers. Okay? Think about the registered report format at CRSP. Okay? You want to discover something interesting and important about the world, right? You have some idea, you do a literature review, you find an unanswered question, you come up with a rigorous method for answering that question, and you submit a proposal. Okay? That question and the proposed method get vetted and improved upon by other scientists, and the community of scientists then agree that the question is worthwhile and the methods are appropriate. You do the research, you write up the results, and you get a publication. Okay. What is the emphasis that takes place in that entire registered report process? The emphasis is all about discovery. Okay. It's about scientific exploration. It's about learning about the world, discovering something interesting and important, which is at core what we really love to do as scientists and what we love to do as researchers. Okay. The registered report format allows you to care about that and that only because it's going to reward you for doing that. Okay? The registered report format rewards you for asking an interesting question and using scientific methods to answer that question. It rewards you for being a good scientist, for being curious, for being rigorous, for developing interesting tests of meaningful questions that can shed light on the mysteries of the world. That's science. Okay? At core, that is what science is all about. And it's hard to think of a description of science that's more true to why we want to do this thing that we spend so much of our lives doing. Now, let's switch gears. Let's think about the standard publication model that we currently have, the typical peer review bridge that you have to pay a toll to get past. Okay? In order to get past that bridge, you've got to pay a toll, and that toll is finding a statistically significant result. Okay? In most sciences, okay, and in particular in the social sciences where we've seen a lot of the research integrity problems emerge over the last couple of decades. Okay? That focuses, because of the incentives, that focuses the researchers on that goal. It's not on the goal of discovery, it's not on the goal of learning something interesting about the world, but on the goal of finding statistical significance and doing whatever it takes to get to that goal, okay? Because we need to pay that toll to get across the bridge, because that's where the incentives are. The incentives are on the other side of the bridge in the standard peer review model. Okay? And that incentivizes or motivates all of the unethical behaviors, all of the poor research practices that we've seen and that we all know a lot about. Okay? So the standard research and publication process it shifts our focus, okay? The incentives that exist shift our focus away from our love of science and our love of discovery, which is, again, why we're doing this thing in the first place. Okay? So I think actually one of the major benefits that is often not initially understood about the registered report format is actually a transformation for the researcher in terms of what they're doing and why they're doing it, right? And that removes a lot of the incentives for the bad driving that we see going across the bridge. Right? It refocuses us on the thing that we initially cared about when we got involved in research, which is doing interesting and rigorous work to learn something about the world. Okay? It's not about paying tolls and getting to the other side of the bridge. None of us got involved in this to pay tolls and get to the other side of the bridge. But that's what we're being rewarded for under the current structure. Okay? And you can see in this context, there's the common belief that people have that pre-registration is going to kill exploration or kill discovery is absolutely wrong. Okay? There's this common belief that people have that if I pre-register, my hands are going to be tied, I can't learn anything new or interesting about the world, and that's going to restrict or narrow my research experience. Okay? That's wrong, and that's actually wrong in two different ways. First of all, in the actual practice that we see at CRSP, okay, of course you can explore your data, and of course you can do whatever analyses you didn't propose, and you can do post hoc and exploratory analyses. If you didn't think to pre-register some, is your effect moderated by gender or something, of course you can still do that. There's no rule that says in pre-registration that you can't do something that you didn't pre-register. You can do whatever you want with your data. It's just that all of those things are understood as being exploratory rather than confirmatory. Okay? At CRSP, any analysis, anything that you do with your data that you didn't have in the stage 1 manuscript, you can do. It just goes under a section that's literally titled Exploratory Analyses. Okay? And then you're free to do whatever you want. Okay? So you're not being penalized by failing to do something, and you're not being restricted in not doing something that you didn't think of ahead of time. Okay? And in fact, we encourage authors, if they do have some exploratory analysis that produces something interesting, they can resubmit then a revised manuscript with a proposed confirmatory second study of that initial exploratory thing that they found, which is a great model for science, right? You did something, you explored, and then you followed it up and confirmed, okay? And then you go through the same stage 1, stage 2 process with that. Okay, so yes, you can explore your data, you can learn new things with pre-registration. It's not going to stop you from doing that. Okay? But the second way that the idea that pre-registration restricts discovery is wrong is in the following way. I would suggest that actually the standard publication model that we have is more restrictive and is less conducive to discovery than the registered report model. That's because the standard publication model defines discovery in one way and one way only, which is finding a statistically significant result that doesn't deviate too far from what the reviewers and the editor want to be true about the world. Okay? And it tells you that you failed to discover anything if you don't meet those criteria. Okay? I get that this is also more relevant for those fields that deal in hypothesis testing and in particular null hypothesis significance testing, and also is only true under conditions of publication bias. But in the world in which we actually exist in most of the social sciences, that actually tends to be true. Okay? So it's not the case that pre-registration restricts discovery. It's actually the exact opposite. Okay? That pre-registration, in particular registered reports, allows discovery in a way that the standard publication process doesn't. Okay? And as evidence for this, I would have you find someone who's published at CRSP and ask them what they thought about the process. Okay? Ask them, did you feel like you were engaged in a process of discovery, and did you feel that more than in the standard journals that you've published in? Okay? And I would also say you could ask the reviewers, okay? Find people who have reviewed for our journal and ask them the same thing. And I'm telling you, it comes across in their reviews, they feel like they have contributed to the discovery of something interesting, okay? The message that we get from those reviewers is, I am so excited to see this research done. I don't really care what happens, I just want to find out, okay? And it was great to be a part of that experience, okay? So I hope I've given you some understanding of the difference between standard pre-registration and the registered report model, and also some reasons why the registered report model is really a particularly strong model for encouraging good research practices and strong research integrity in scientists. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have about the process.
It works. Thank you very much for this strong plea for pre-registration and registered reports more specifically. There is time for a few questions, and two people are lined up already. The floor is yours first. Please say who you are and pose your question.
So it sounds good, and there's some plausibility. Do you have any evidence that it improves anything important like reducing hype and spin and improving the reporting of results?
Sure. I can tell you we definitely publish more failures than the Standard Journal. So in terms of actual quantitative information, one of the things that we're doing within the next year, so we started in 2015, we just now, in this coming year, I think we'll have enough data to do some real quantitative metrics on replicability, on power of the published studies, and so on. So what we're going to do is I was just talking with Kai Jonas last night, we're going to get a team of 2 or 3 people to put together a proposal for analyzing the papers in CRSP compared to analyzing the papers in other journals, in other social personality journals, but even other journals like PNAS or Science, the psychology work that's published in there. We're then going to have that proposal go through the peer review process, go through the stage 1, stage 2 peer review process at CRSP and produce those metrics. Having looked at it, I could tell you for sure the details that are present in our papers are absolutely to a greater degree than the detail that are present in standard publications, because that's something that the AEs are instructed to pay attention to, is can someone read this article and reproduce the study directly? So qualitatively, I could tell you for sure that's true. Quantitatively, like I said, within the next year or so, we'll have the answer to that. I will absolutely bet we could bet a nice bottle of scotch on it or something that we are going to look better than any other journal in social psychology on all of those metrics. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. I do share your enthusiasm for pre-registration and for registered reports. That said, coming from basic laboratory science, I have a harder time seeing, I mean, it certainly is a very good model for something that's really planned in advance, like a clinical trial or many psychology experiments, but like in a road of like basic bench science, when you have like one experiment and then like with this you do the other, it's exploratory in nature, right? And a paper ends up being like 10 or 15 or 20 experiments, which are kind of like thought of during the process. And of course, you can't wait for like 3 months for peer review in between each of them. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how can you implement that in more exploratory areas of science.
So there are a few things. One is the time delay. It's not the case. I agree with you, actually, and I don't think we should be naive about it. There is a time delay that happens, and it can be an unpleasant thing. If you have an idea and you're really excited about that idea, and you're going to do a registered report, you're going to have to wait to do that study. Okay, and sometimes we're really excited about that idea, and we want to just do the study. Okay, so we shouldn't be naive. There is that delay. I would say sometimes it's a good idea to get other input from other scientists before you jump into that study and then miss something and have wasted resources. But even given that, you're right that there is the delay there. Note, of course, you're going to have delay anyway. You're going to have delay at the end publication stage rather than the beginning stage. But it is a case that oftentimes we are excited and we want to get things moving, and there is a delay there. But in the case of that kind of building and that exploration, at some point, at least in most sciences, you want to replicate some work that you've done and some exploration they've done, even in the basic science, in the basic laboratory work. So there's no reason why you can't, if you've explored and you found something quite interesting, again, at the basic science level, and most of the, maybe 75% or so of the papers in our journal I would classify as basic science rather than applied science. But even at that point, you have something that you found, you can then do a registered report for a replication plus extension, okay? Where what you would normally do is build on that in the lab. You just push that line of research into the registered report, you replicate and you extend. Okay? And actually, we have no studies in our journal so far that are pure replications. They're all replications and extensions. So I think actually even in the basic research process that does fit in with the model. But yes, I should say that there is that initial delay that can be really unpleasant psychologically. Yeah.
Two last small short questions and short answers. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's really more like a comment. Gunther Eisenbach from JMIA Publications. We are publishing a journal which is called JMIA Research Protocols, which only publishes protocols and grant proposals. And we recently adopted a identifier, which is called the International Registered Report Identifier. So each protocol which we publish has this identifier in the abstract, enabling other journals, when authors go ahead and publish their reports, that they put that IRID identifier in the abstract, which links back to the protocol. An additional benefit is that sometimes, or quite often actually, people publish a protocol
can you find
when
your question?
They had already collected data. No, it's just a comment.
No, we don't take comments. Next question, please.
My question is simple, because you didn't show us your pre-register format as model. So what I understand, maybe just like the first draft of abstract.
Sure.
Abstract. For example, in the 2 days, the poster, do you think it's just like the
so the question is about the format of the pre-registration, right? The question is about the format?
Yeah, you didn't show us format, so I don't know.
Sure. So
what's
in here,
so I just want to say the sample. Thank you.
Yeah. So here in the format looks at the IPA stage. The format, the pre-registered format, looks exactly like a standard manuscript. Okay. So in psychology, for instance, it's an APA formatted manuscript that's double-spaced. It is going to look exactly like your final manuscript, except everything is a proposal and not already done. But for something like a poster, this wouldn't be relevant for that kind of model.
Okay.
That's something that you would use for OSF or something like that. This is specifically for research that will end up being a kind of published manuscript.
Okay, we can discuss after. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again very much.
Great.
Thank you very much.